there's intimacy on the radio and there's naturalness on the radio that can never be replicated on TV. The marvelous resurgence of radio as a political force in this country.
News-related radio programming is evolving.
There's a huge hole in our dialogue that can be filled by the synthesis of traditional radio and the freedom that comes from a live podcast. You're about to experience Cowboy State Politics live. Here we go. Fantastic installment of Cowboy State Politics Live from very high above all the puerile and mendacious forms of Wyoming mainstream media. This is Cowboy State Politics. I, of course, am your illustrious host, David Iverson, firmly ensconced behind the silver Cowboy State Politics microphone and broadcasting to you from the base of the Bighorns at the Cowboy State Politics Studio in Sheridan, Wyoming. Good morning, my friends, and welcome to the program. Happy Friday. It's Open Line Friday. That's right, my friends. Open Line Friday on Cowboy State Politics Live. It's the day where we talk about whatever you want to talk about. You see, normally during the week, if you call in, you kind of have to talk about what I'm talking about. Otherwise, I'm just going to kind of ignore your call. But on Friday, you have to understand the grave risk that I put this entire program under. That whatever comes up on the call-in screen, that's what we're going to talk about. And it is sometimes you get some crazy phone calls. So we're going to do that today, Open Line Friday. If you want to be part of the show, the phone number is 307-374-8989. 307-374-8989. Go ahead and give me a call. Whatever you want to talk about. Something on your mind, a burning question, just something stuck in your craw. That usually happens. I mean, maybe it could be stuck in your gallbladder or somewhere in your liver. I'm not sure. But go ahead and give me a call. The phone number is 307-374-8989. Last night, we attended the Sheridan GOP Central Committee meeting. And as predicted, only half of the elected precinct men and precinct women showed up. Now, when it was election time, we had a packed house. All 84 people that could vote were there. Last night, 43. And, the reason why I wanted to lead with this is that our government is only suited to an informed and a deeply religious and an active populace. If you don't participate in your government, you deserve what you get. And, there are a lot of people in Sheridan, a lot of precincts that were not represented last night. And the lovely Christine and I were talking about this. How disingenuous, how insulting of you to campaign for an office that you're not even going to show up for. There are a lot of people that the only time they ever show up to a meeting is, at election time to see if they can take control of the party and turn it into what it was before, which was, a party that did nothing, that didn't have any meetings, that had no power. And the reason for it is all the elected officials were the people running the party. And, last night was a perfect example of why you don't put redcoats in charge, because they won't do anything. That being said, here in just a second, I'm going to tell you why I have at least some respect for some of the redcoats that were there. But, I'm telling you what, Agent 29, last night was a disgrace.
Yeah, but it's pretty typical. I've been attending those pretty regularly for 5 or 6 years. And on 2 occasions, I have seen the particular gentleman that is the committee man for my area, for my precinct. And to me, that just tells me that he's not willing to represent. Even if you're overwhelmed, um, you ought to be able to at least come up and make the case. If we'd have done that in the 67th legislature, a whole bunch of us just would never have shown up at all, and they'd have gone rampant. The other thing was, I remember one time when we were going to have a resolution against Cyrus Western, and there were several of them showed up for that one.
Oh, yeah.
And then when it came time to vote, got up and walked out before the vote, said, I can't be a part of this.
Yeah, absolutely incredible. And here's the thing, and a lot of people probably don't understand what a precinct man or precinct woman is. It is the lowest elected office in our system. Literally, you are the representative of your neighborhood. Now, the neighborhood is a little bit bigger than, just up and down the street. It's 250 votes for every person in the party that voted for the candidate for the House of Representatives. And I mean, that was a totally clunky way of putting it, but essentially that's what it is. And, most precincts in Sheridan have, a precinct man and a precinct woman, but there are some that have multiple pairs. And so literally the people that are most directly supposed to represent you didn't show up. Now, let me tell you why I have at least some respect for some of the redcoats that were there. And maybe this is a good time for me to explain the term redcoat again. I need to do that on occasion. You see, it's the biggest insult that I can give to people. Being the American history scholar that I am, I think the term redcoat is pretty dang insulting. Well, during the Revolutionary War, the British had spies pretty much everywhere. And nobody really knew the difference between a patriot and a redcoat because they all dressed the same. They all dressed like patriots. But it wasn't until the spies would go home to a house that they had seized from one of the colonists that they took off their patriot clothes and revealed themselves for who they really are, redcoats. And so there are a lot of people in the Republican Party that claim to be Republicans that are really Democrats. And I'll pick on a couple of them. Mark and Tibby Kinner. Mark Kinner's voting record in the House of Representatives is almost exclusively with the Democrats. I mean, it's 70% to 80% of the time he voted with the Democrats. Well, if you're 80% of anything, it kind of means you're that thing. And so last night, there were several people that I would consider total redcoats. Lonnie Wright, from Sheridan County Commissioner, Steve Brantz, Sheridan City Councilman, total redcoats. But they were there, and I brought a Doge-type resolution last night that directed the chairman to set up a committee to investigate spending at the county level and the city level. And they may not have agreed with it, but at least they were willing to participate in the discussion. And really what they were trying to do was kill the resolution so that we wouldn't have any investigations into what they're spending. But, in the end, they lost. And here's the irony, Agent 29. Those folks are going to be investigated for what they do, that is, sit on the city council or the county commission, and the body that they're a part of is going to investigate their work. It's beautifully ironic. So anyway, that was last night at the Sheridan County Central Committee meeting. And, those are important to go to. Oh, and here's another thing that I noticed. Even the usual suspects did not show up. I'm talking about Jeff Wallach and his crew. Usually they're there, but I think perhaps they've realized that, maybe there's been a change in leadership in the Sheridan County Republican Party, and maybe he's not going to have as much influence. And more on Jeff Wallach in the coming episodes. But let's begin at the top here. And the White House, I don't know if have you watched any of those press conferences at all? I mean, they are absolutely hilarious. Catherine Levitt, I mean, she is absolutely amazing.
I have a life.
What? This is my life. This is what I do for a living.
It certainly is.
So from Fortune magazine, the White House says it will not respond to reporters who list identifying pronouns in their email signatures. From the Associated Press, the Associated Press isn't the only news outlet that is having trouble getting access to the Trump administration. The White House is refusing to answer emails from reporters who list their preferred pronouns in their email signatures. That, according to the New York Times. several officials have responded to queries with non-answers, citing the pronoun addition to signatures. Caroline Leavitt, the White House press secretary, wrote a reporter saying, quote, "As a matter of policy, we do not respond to reporters with pronouns in their bios." In other words, we're not going to engage in a conversation with someone who doesn't know the difference between a man and a woman, and rightfully so. I mean, no reason whatsoever that you should engage with somebody that can't understand basic biology. That the very reason that they exist is because they had a mother and a father. I mean, it seems pretty elementary to me.
I just wanted to say, excuse me, wanted to say this about that. If you want to pretend to be whatever it is you want to pretend to be, if you want to be a furry or whatever, that's your right. You have every right to go do that, and I'll support and defend that right. But you got to support and defend my right not to play your stupid game.
Well, that's exactly the point, right? I don't care what you do. I mean, you could claim to be a dog for all I care, or a giraffe, or a zebra, or an iguana. But don't try to force me to participate in your fantasy. You know, if you want to wear stupid furry ears and a tail and look ridiculous, hey, man, more power to you. But don't force me to participate in your dreamland.
Okay, it is Open Line Friday, so I'm going to bend this just a little bit. I've wrestled with this idea in my mind because I love the story of Don Quixote.
Okay.
And how did they try to cure Don Quixote of his madness? But they worked within his dream and forced him to see reality through that way. And sometimes I think maybe we need to come up with another tactic where, okay, we're going to play your silly game, but I don't know how you work that out. But that's one of those parallels, because I love what they did, or how they tried to do it with Quixote. Of course, he in the end won. The crazy one won. So yeah, I'm not sure that's a good point.
I don't know. I saw some
interesting idea
on Facebook, and you never. Well, of course, everything on the internet is true, but in this one, kid comes home from school and he says, "Mom and Dad, I think I'm a dog." And his dad says, "Fine, okay." Well, they sit down to dinner, and he sits down at his place, and his dad says, "Dogs aren't allowed at the table. You eat out of the bowl." And their mom is dishing up dinner, and there's a fabulous steak that she's cooked, and the boy's looking a little bit forlorn, and he's thinking, "Man, those steaks look good." And his dad says something to the effect of, "Yeah, they really do. Too bad dogs don't eat steaks. Here's your dinner.
By the way, go outside for the night."
Yeah, exactly right. That's how it ends up, right?
Yeah.
And the kid says, "I have to go to the bathroom," and his dad says, doggies go to the bathroom outside. Well, it didn't take too long for the boy to decide that he's not a puppy anymore. But that is the enormity of the ridiculousness that in which we find ourselves. That we really do have people that are so mentally deranged. And Ken, my mom has a theory about this. My mom's worked in the grade school over in Johnson County for 25 years. And she says that a lot of this, probably most of this, is attention-seeking behavior. That you used to have kids that would act out. You would be the class clown. And the whole reason why kids do that is they, either they're either A, a complete screw up, or B, they don't have, they're not getting the attention that they need at home. And so they act out at school. And, when you're not getting any attention, even bad attention is a good thing. So, maybe it's attention seeking behavior. I don't know. I don't buy into all this craziness. Anyway, I don't know how we got on this topic. Oh yeah, that's right. I had an article. Anyway, Open Line Friday on Cowboy State Politics Live. When we come back, we're going to talk about how Amazon may be doing the right thing. Back in a minute. You are listening to Cowboy State Politics Live. You can listen to the program on YouTube, on Facebook, on X, on Rumble, pretty much everywhere. It's almost like I'm omnipresent. If you miss an episode of Cowboy State Politics Live, you can always go to the live replay, which is located at the website, cowboystatepolitics.com, under the live replay button. You can listen to Cowboy State Politics Live every Tuesday through Friday at 8 a.m. You can listen to the Cowboy State Politics podcast anywhere that you get your podcasts. iHeartRadio, iTunes, TuneIn, really any of them will work. But the easiest place is just to go to the website, cowboystatepolitics.com. There you can find all of the shows, as well as any of the articles that I might bring up during the course of a program. That way, if your name is Joe Biden and you can't remember if you had your pudding today, well, I probably can't help you with that, but I can definitely tell you why you should have never ran for president. And now, back to our program. Welcome back to the program. David Iverson on Open Line Friday. That's right, my friends. You're listening to Cowboy State Politics Live. Documented to be almost always right 99% of the time. A record that the media, they could never aspire to that, even though they should. I mean, it's just amazing to me that the bull crap that comes out of the media. But every once in a while, you get a little nugget here and there. Perhaps a blind squirrel finds a nut every now and again. Well, that may be the case with Amazon. And I've got a bunch of stories here that talk about the effects that Doge is actually happening. You know, a lot of things happen in government and you don't really see the effects, or at the very least, you know, maybe they're having an effect and we just don't realize it here back at home. But let me give you one that you might be able to see from the post-millennial. Amazon cancels wholesale orders of products made in China amid the trade war. And I quote, following tariffs implemented by President Donald Trump in early April, Amazon has canceled orders for some products made in China or other Asian countries. The U.S. tariff on Chinese imports now stands at 125%. People familiar with the matter told Bloomberg that the company halted orders for air conditioners, beach chairs, scooters, and other items from Amazon vendors following Trump's April 2nd announcement on tariffs on over 180 countries worldwide. Per the outlet, quote, the timing of the cancellations, which had no warning, led the vendors to suspect it was a response to tariffs. It is unclear how many types of merchandise the cancellations would affect, or how widespread the cancellations were. One email reviewed by Bloomberg was sent to a vendor who has been selling beach chairs on Amazon made in China for over a decade. The company told the vendor in the email sent last week that it was canceling some purchase orders it had placed, quote, in error, and told the vendor not to ship them. So it could be a coincidence. More likely than not, it is Jeff Bezos sucking up to President Trump, because that's what's been happening. Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg, all of the big, I don't know if you want to call them tech giants or whatever, at the inauguration, all of them were sitting there clapping. But it was an exercise in how much they could suck up to the president. And, you know, if you'll notice, there really hasn't been that many changes on Facebook. I don't know. I know, you know, Mr. Producer, you don't spend that much time on Facebook, but I do. And I really haven't seen that much.
It feels like a long time.
I'm sure it does. Well, let's just kind of dig into this whole tariff situation with China for just a second. Now, the vast majority of the goods that China ships to the U.S. have a profit margin that is actually relatively low. In the U.S., if your profit margin is not somewhere between 35 and 40% and you're a retailer, you're not going to be making enough money to keep your business afloat, because you have to be charging enough to replace that item and turn a profit and cover the overhead. And for most businesses, the markup is 140%. So 40% over and above what the replacement cost is. And, in China, they produce a mass amount of goods, ship them over to the US, and it is the volume of the sales, not the profit margin off the individual sale. So let me give you an example. And this is one of my favorite examples. The company called Fastenal. Fastenal makes bolts. Now, some of the bolts are pretty expensive depending on what they are. But when the company started, they were just supplying your run of the mill screws and bolts and nuts and all that, and none of them really had a high profit margin. I mean, how much money can you make on a 1/4-inch bolt? Not very much. But it was the volume that they sold the bolts and nuts and screws in that made the profit. And that's the same principle that China operates on. Now, the truth is that there aren't a lot of American goods that are sold in China. There really aren't. But where China makes most of their money is right here from the good old US of A. And so when tariffs are 125% over and above what the Chinese company is charging, that really cuts into or eliminates the profit margin of Chinese goods. So even though you're seeing articles this morning that say that, China is not going to budge on this trade war, well, that's not going to last very long, because at 125%, they're not going to be making any money for very long. So when you have a company like Amazon, who is one of the major retailers in the entire country, saying, yeah, you know what, we're not going to import a lot of this crap from China, it is going to have a dramatic effect on their bottom line. And in the end, you'll see China bend, even though there's a lot of liberal outlets that are just unwilling or, maybe intellectually unable to tell you the truth. And it is going to be, the trade war is terrible.
I kind of look at it as it's a standoff, two people facing each other with a gun. Who has the bigger gun? Who has just finished their meal and who is starving?
Mm-hmm. Exactly right.
Who has to take a leak and who's quite comfortable? And nobody on earth is more comfortable than the United States.
Absolutely. And it kills me, and this is totally off subject, but in the United States, the poorest among us is far more wealthy than 85% of the planet. And think about it here, right? If you're a poor person, you probably still have a pair of tennis shoes. Maybe they're not, a brand new pair of Air Jordans. You probably still have a cell phone. You may even have a car. It may not be the nicest car, but it still runs and it still gets you from point A to point B. But you're not living in a shack with a dirt floor and no shoes on at all. My point is here that if you're comparing economies, China is no comparison. I mean, the amount of wealth, and yeah, I mean, their wealth is generated by the breadth of their economy. But when you can't sell your goods in America because of the 125% tariffs, there's going to be a problem, and you're going to see them acquiesce here pretty good. Oh, by the way, it's Open Line Friday, so if you want to opine on some of the things that we're talking about, go ahead and give me a call. The phone number in the studio is 307-374-8989. Now, I mentioned at the top of this block that a lot of the things that happen in government, you really don't see the effect here at home. And that's partially due to the media not covering it. Because if there's a Republican in office, and it doesn't matter which Republican it is, whether it's Donald Trump or when George Bush was president, even though he really wasn't a conservative at all, or when Ronald Reagan was president, the media is not going to report on any successes that a conservative Republican has. But let me just give you one right here from zerohedge.com. And by the way, if you want a website that is pretty, I don't want to say up to the minute on financial news, you can't really get much better than zerohedge.com if you want to talk about the economy. It's a really great website. But here's the title of the article: March deficit unexpectedly tumbles to a 5-year low as Doge cracks down on Democrat money laundering scheme. So we're actually seeing an effect in the trade deficit. That's huge, my friends. Let me read a couple of paragraphs here. 1 month ago, when looking at the latest U.S. Treasury income and spending, or as it is better known, the deficit data, we found something shocking in the data. The last months of the Biden administration were marked by spending unlike anything ever seen before. In fact, spending in the first 6 months of the fiscal year 2025, so this one, surpassed even the crisis of 2020 and 2021 when the U.S. injected trillions of dollars into the economy. Then Doge came on the scene, and things changed very quickly. Earlier today, and this article was published yesterday, the Treasury published its revenue and spending report for the month of March, the first month when Doge was fully operational, and the results were astounding. In March, the total U.S. government receipts were $368 billion, while spending totaled $528 billion. Trump said it's an honor to impose reciprocal tariffs as the stock market. Oh, that was an ad. Never mind. Continuing on. The difference between how much money the U.S. brought in versus how much it spent means that in March, the U.S. budget deficit was $161 billion, which sounds a lot like it is until you realize that in February, the deficit was almost twice as much at $307 billion. So this month, $161 billion. Last month, $307 billion. So a lot of that can be attributed to the cuts that Doge is making. So first of all, receipts rose 10.7% to $367 billion, which is good. But what was great is that spending, which has traditionally been the real problem, actually shrank to 7.1%. Shrank 7.1% to $528 billion. So Doge is actually having a noticeable effect on the deficit. That's incredible. Now, it's another one of those things that you probably don't see at home, simply because, that's the media is not going to report on it, because that's big news when the deficit is actually going down. This is something we've heard from administration after administration, that we're going to reduce just answer me this question. How often have you heard, we're going to tackle the debt? Our debt is $36 trillion. We can't sustain that. The deficit, we have to lower the deficit. How often have you heard that from a politician? Like every single one of them, when they're running for office anyway. Well, now it's actually happening. So absolutely good news. And again, one of those things that the mainstream media is not going to tell you about. Now, we've only got about 3 minutes until the break, but we're gonna take that early, because when we come back, I'm going to play you an excellent interview from Rebecca Bextel, who is running to be the chairman of the Wyoming Republican Party. So we're going to do that right when we come back. So let's go to a break, and when we come back, I'll play you that interview. It's really good. If you want to know who she is, this is the interview to watch, and we'll do that in just a second.
Coin Capital, we hear from Americans across the United States who have a growing concern about the future purchasing power of U.S. paper money. Many Americans are looking for an alternative for long-term capital. For more than 35 years, the people at U.S. Coin Capital have educated American investors on how to properly accumulate United States gold and silver coins. Call us at 1-800-878-2646 or visit us on the web, uscoincapital.com.
Make sure that you subscribe and follow the Cowboy State Politics podcast. You can do that from the website, cowboystatepolitics.com, or anywhere that you get your podcasts. That way, you'll make sure that you won't miss a single episode of Cowboy State Politics.
Some say standing up for what you believe in is being extreme. Ask any woman in Wyoming. They'll tell you this is called courage. The mainstream media claims that holding the line on important issues is being unreasonable. My mom taught me this is called staying true to our principles. In other places, people argue you always have to compromise to get something done. Here in Wyoming, we know that some things are worth protecting at all costs. Some say it's time we give up on the values that made our state great to accommodate toxic culture. I say it's time to stand tall and protect the values that have served Wyoming well for over 134 years. Join Honor Wyoming as we defend and preserve the Wyoming way of life. Find out how you can make a difference today.
Visit honorwyoming.org. Welcome back to the program, my friends. David Iverson, Cowboy State Politics Live. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Yeah, we put a lot of work into this studio, and one of the things we're really proud of is that we can do pretty high-quality interviews on the show. And this week, we've had Representative Harriet Hageman on. That one was published on Wednesday. I think that one turned out great. And today I've got another interview for you with my friend, Rebecca Bextel. She's running to be the chairman of the Wyoming Republican Party. And I'm telling you, a lot of people that run for office, you get a hint of what they want to do, right? What their plans are, what their stances are. If it's somebody running for the House of Representatives, they'll say, well, we spend too much. I love my guns. Taxes are too high, those sorts of things. But rarely do you get a look into who that person really is. And that's one of the things that I'm really proud of in this interview. I think that it is a really good picture of who Rebecca Bextel is. And so I'm going to go ahead and play the interview for you. It runs about 16 minutes. So here you go. Joining me on Cowboy State Politics Live in the brand new studio is Rebecca Bextel. Now, before we even get started, Rebecca is a sponsor of Cowboy State Politics, and she has been for a really long time. Now, she's running to be the chairman of the Wyoming Republican Party. So first, Rebecca, welcome to Cowboy State Politics.
Thank you so much, and I love the new studio.
Thank you very much. We've worked really hard on it, and I'm ecstatic how it turned out. So you're running for the Wyoming Republican Party chairman. I don't want to start there. First, I want you to tell me a little bit about yourself. Introduce yourself to my audience.
Okay. Well, I grew up in Alabama. I was the second of 5 children. My dad was a Baptist preacher. My mother was a school teacher. And when I was a little girl, they decided to go to the mission field. So we lived in Costa Rica and Guatemala. So my dad helped a group of indigenous people there, and my mom got really sick, so we moved back to Alabama.
Okay. Well, now the story of how you ended up in Wyoming is a really interesting one to me, and I don't want to go there quite yet because first I think we should probably just hit the nail on the head. Why are you running for the chairman of the Wyoming Republican Party?
Because I'm crazy.
Okay. Fair enough.
Actually, I really love our country. I really, really love Wyoming. I picked this state to live here. I feel like I've won the lottery. This is the greatest state. This is the greatest place in the world. And I really believe in Republican values and our 23 planks of the Republican platform. I worked really hard in the last few elections. I used to just stick to Teton County. I started branching out around the state. And I really enjoyed helping candidates raise money and strategizing, knocking on doors, attending meetings. I just really loved it. And this is something that people started asking me about doing, and I just decided to take the leap. I spent a lot of time praying about it, talking to my family, and here I am.
Now, I don't know that many people in Wyoming that would look at Teton County and say, that's a conservative place. In fact, since I was really young, my parents told me, hey, if you really want to go to Wyoming, don't go to Jackson. It doesn't even look like Wyoming. And it's like a Democrat stronghold. Well, it still is, except for one respect. Now, one of the visits, and I don't even think we had met yet, but I went to Teton County to give a little speech. And I remember talking to the then chairman, and I mentioned to her, I'm like, no, wait a minute. All these people are redcoats. They're all rhinos. And she says, no. That's just Teton County. Well, we all know in Wyoming that if you want to get elected, you kind of have to be a Republican. And that was definitely the case in Jackson. And the truth is, really, they were just Democrats who had an R at the end of their name. But that's not the case anymore. So tell me how that happened. How did you flip Teton County?
Well, I can certainly understand everyone's concerns. We, up until recently, definitely had Democrats on the Teton County board. I mean, there's no doubt about it. But we worked for years to flip the party, and so many people voted for Liz Cheney, Democrats that switched to Republicans, that we ended up with a lot of precinct seats this time. So I just went around and we had meetings at my office. We literally went through the entire voter rolls, identifying true conservatives. We asked them to be precinct people. I literally chased people down in hayfields. A guy had eyeball.
That's hilarious.
No, I did, but a guy had eyeball surgery. I showed up at his house. Actually, a man had a stroke right before the election, and my husband drove to Idaho Falls to a care facility to get his proxy. I mean, we didn't have a single vote to spare, but we flipped it back to true conservatives, true Republicans.
Yeah, I think you did an amazing job. And how many seats was that? It was a big number.
78 seats is what we ended up with.
Wow.
And I am so thankful that we're right where we're at. Kat Rucker's going to do a great job as chair. I was voted in as state committeewoman, and David Shern is the state committee man, and we're ready to roll.
Well, I think it's amazing that you were able to flip a Democrat stronghold, and I think it's to your credit that you were able to make that happen. Now, during the legislative session, I saw you in Cheyenne a lot.
Yes.
So I've asked this question of a number of people that spent time in Cheyenne. What was your impression of the legislative session this go around?
Okay. Well, let's jump right in. I did spend a lot of time there. I was really proud of Speaker Nyman. I think he did a great job. John Bear never took a seat. It felt like, he was constantly working the room and talking. I helped get a lot of the people in the House elected as far as raising money, and I was very proud of their voting record. I think that I wish we had gotten more accomplished, to be honest. I also observed the Senate. I had a few concerns, to be honest with you. I felt like there's room for improvement, but that is not to say that these individual senators are not fantastic people. There just seemed to be a lot of pressure in the Senate, and I don't know how conservative it can be if Slithers Netherclad is the majority floor leader. I don't know how else to say it, but there's room for improvement, and I look forward to working really hard.
Yeah, and I think that we would be being completely dishonest if we didn't say that there were some good things that came out of the session. I think there absolutely were. There's no more gun-free zones in Wyoming. We got a pretty sizable tax break for Wyoming citizens. I wish that we had gotten actual tax reform and not just another Band-Aid. But the reality is there were some good things that got accomplished. Now, I agree with you that we could have done a lot more. And I think everybody knows that I have the same reservations about the Senate. So another story that I don't think hardly anybody knows about you, but because we're friends, I've heard the nitty-gritty details on this one. How, and
I can't wait to hear what you're going to say.
Put it this way. How, of all places, did you end up in Jackson, Wyoming?
Well, I can't say if I had it to do over again, I would end up in Teton County, but it was 20 years ago. Uh, basically, I didn't see a future for myself in Alabama, and that was painful for me. My mother's family is arguably the first or second pioneer family in the state of Alabama. I'm a proud member of the Daughters of the American Revolution, but I grew up in a town where it almost felt like a caste system. I never saw anybody rise above their circumstance. It's almost like we were frozen in time, and the same families did well, and the same families were always poor. And I just didn't see myself there anymore.
You didn't
And
want that for yourself.
I didn't. I do believe in the American dream, and I'm living the American dream. And this is before, the internet is like it was. And I just took a chance, and I left Alabama with $186 in my pocket. I tell my husband all the time, if my car broke down in Nebraska, I'd be married to a Nebraskan by now, because nobody was going to rescue me. But lucky for Jonathan, I made it to Wyoming. And
Well, I don't know, maybe lucky for you. I've met your husband. He's a pretty nice guy.
that's true. Surely we both got lucky. But I lived in my car and just started working, and I love it. I am attached to Teton County. I know people have reservations, but there are some good, decent people there. And the opportunities I've had, I wouldn't have had in Alabama.
How much money did you have when you actually got to Jackson?
Probably about $20 left.
$20.
Yeah.
And you were able to build a life and build a family and a successful business in Teton County. I think that's amazing. The lovely Christine and I visit there, and sometimes I look and I'm like, are we really paying this much for a cup of coffee?
Mm-hmm.
It's absolutely incredible. But I think that your story is emblematic of what you can do when you put your mind to it. That you're living in and I don't know, maybe 20 years ago, maybe it wasn't the most wealthy county in America, but it certainly is now. And you showed up with $20, and now you're a successful businesswoman. Now, what do you do for a living, by the way?
Well, I've never been scared of hard work, David. I've always been willing to do whatever it takes. And I actually miss being a waitress. I know that sounds crazy, but I was a waitress for years. I was a beverage cart attendant at golf courses, and I loved those jobs. And I worked as hard as I could at those jobs. My husband and I are small business owners. We provide business services to people around the world, actually. And I became a realtor because so many of our customers eventually moved to Wyoming. They were escaping places like California and Illinois. My customers definitely tend to be Republican, so I feel like I'm bringing the place up. But, used to I only sold things in Teton County, but now people are moving all over the state.
What do you want to change in the Republican Party, if anything?
I would like to get the precinct people more involved. I can't believe how many people that I talked into being precinct people that complained about Teton County GOP for years, but they didn't understand how we change it. So I would like to get more precinct people involved. I would like to get more youth involved. I'm a mother of 4 daughters, and they are definitely little Republicans. And it's important to me to get the youth involved. I'd like to grow the party. My friends joke you can't get to the right of me, and you probably can't.
I don't know.
I don't know.
That.
I'm pretty conservative, but I would like to grow the party to include all Republicans. They don't have to agree with me to be a Republican. I'd like to get platform candidates elected for sure. Grow the party, encourage the grassroots, keep going with all the excellent things that Frank and the current board have done. Chairman Uthenhorn has done a great job. He took us from the Uniparty to a Republican Party. I'm very thankful for that. I really admire literally every person on the board right now. And I want to continue the work they've done and take the party to a new level.
Excellent. Now, you mentioned your kids. How many kids do you have?
I've got 4 daughters, my 4 H girls, Harper, Helen, Hazel, and Hannah.
All right. Now, as I understand it, and I've met some of your kids. I think I've met them all.
Yes, you have.
So you have a special needs daughter.
Yes.
Tell me about her.
Well, Hannah's our 4th daughter. She's 5 years old. I knew immediately there was something wrong, but the doctors keep saying, everything's fine. She had some problems with just very basic things like nursing. And eventually she actually fell out. My husband gave her CPR and brought her literally back to life. And we spent 1 month in the hospital when she was 3 months old. And she was missing every milestone. And eventually we looked at literally our checkbook, and we said, we don't care about nice cars. I don't have fancy things. We can afford to do this. And we basically spent every penny we had on therapy programs for her for years. For 3 years, we spent 8 months in Jerusalem. We went around America at first, but we noticed that in America, there's not a push to overcome something. You learn to cope with something. And we wanted to give our daughter the best chance that she could. So we started going abroad just for that reason. And eventually we learned that she had a very rare genetic disorder. It's called SCN3A. It doesn't even have a name. And only 75 people in the whole world have it, 40 in America. So we don't know a lot about it, but she will likely never talk. If we had known she had this genetic disorder, she wouldn't have walked. But we kept pushing, and she can't run or jump, but she walks, and she's a happy little thing, and I'm very thankful that she's cuddly. Sometimes on the weekends, I will rock her in a chair for 2 hours straight. And she loves affection. She loves attention. And we're very blessed that she has 3 older sisters that really love her. So we couldn't be in a better place. And my husband always says, when you have a child like Hannah that has a rare genetic disorder, it's obviously God's plan. That was what God intended for us. And there's comfort in that.
Now, it sounds like you're kind of a busy lady. I mean, you have a busy home life. You're a successful businesswoman. How are you going to balance all of this running for, if you're successful in your chairman's race, how are you going to balance that with your business and your family life? How are you going to do all that?
Well, I started our business, but eventually I got demoted. So my husband completely runs our business now, and he's the boss. I do sell some real estate here and there. The nice thing about Jackson Hole is you only have to sell 1 or 2 things a year to earn a good living, to be honest with you. And I homeschooled my children for years, and we also did the classical education. But people can't believe it. I put all the kids in. 3 of my 4 children are in public school. One's at the Jackson Hole Classical Academy. And people don't believe this when I say it. I'm bored now. I don't even know what to do with myself during the day when the kids are at school, because it was formerly a circus and now it's pretty calm. So I've got the time, the energy, and the resources to do this job.
Okay. Last question. Campaigning across the whole state is kind of a daunting task. And I think if you were to ask any of our statewide elected officials, they will tell you that traveling the whole state, that's pretty hard to do. So what are you doing campaign wise? How are you campaigning? Give me the plan.
Well, unfortunately, I now have to drive around the state doing the speed limit. I received a letter. I received a letter yesterday from the state again that says if I get 1 more speeding ticket this year, I'll lose my license. That's the second time I've received a letter like that. And it has the intended effect. I do slow down. But I probably should have been a long-haul truck driver. I really love to drive around. I love going around the state. I enjoy myself. I swim in the hot springs when I drive through Thermopolis. I always stop at the informational road signs and learn something. And I'm literally hitting all 23 counties and meeting with the state central committee people and anyone else who would like to talk to me about questions or concerns about the Republican Party.
Well, Rebecca, thank you very much for taking the time to sit down in our brand new studio and visit with me. Is there anything else you'd like to tell Wyoming Republicans?
If elected, I'm going to work really hard, and I'm not going to do an okay job. I'm going to work as hard as I've ever worked at anything. And I understand the concerns about being from Teton County, but and we deserve the reputation that we have. Don't hear me not say that. But there are true conservatives there. There are people who firmly believe in the Republican platform. And I'm one of those people. And if I am elected, I am going to work as hard as I can.
All right. Well, thank you very much for joining me, and good luck.
Thank you for having me.
It's spring-ish in Wyoming. Well, what that means for the uninitiated is that it's going to be 70 degrees one day and then snow 1.5 feet the next. And really, if you don't like those two options, just wait a little bit. The weather will change. I know it sounds a little stressful, but really you should put your mind at ease and buy a pair of socks from the Buffalo Wool Company. They'll keep you warm and dry even on the nastiest, coldest spring-ish day, and they'll keep you cool and dry even when it's 75 and sunny. To get you a pair, go to their website, thebuffalowoolco.com. Trust me, you're not going to be disappointed. Are you one of those people that said something like this before Trump became president?
I have a house in Spain that is going to be ready right after the election.
Siberia,
Nova Scotia.
I'm definitely moving to Canada.
Straight to hell.
Iceland, France.
Asia's pretty cool.
And has the past 5 weeks just been more than you could bear? If that's the case, you have come to the right place. All you need to do is call my friend Rebecca Bextel at Compass Real Estate. She has her fingers on the pulse of the real estate market all across the state of Wyoming. Last year, she sold around $30 million worth of property, everything from small residential properties all the way up to big giant ranches. So if you've got to get the heck out of Dodge, if you've got to be gone Johnson because you can't stand that Trump is the president, call Rebecca Bextel. Her phone number is 307-699-3519. Let me say that one more time for you in case you missed it. 307-699-3519.
I've never felt the freedom like I do. I feel stronger every day, don't you? Well, I can show you how. A new day, a new way. Watch out, I'm only gonna get stronger. A new day, a new way. Watch out, I'm only gonna get stronger. A new day, a new way. Watch out, I'm only gonna get stronger. A new day, a new way. Watch out, I'm only gonna get stronger. I've never felt the freedom like I do. I'm stronger every day. I'm only gonna get stronger.
Cowboy State Politics is only going to continue to expand. You can watch the program on YouTube, Facebook, X, and on Rumble. Don't forget about the Cowboy State Politics podcast, Wyoming's most listened to political program. Welcome back to the program, my friends. David Iverson, Cowboy State Politics Live on Open Line Friday. If you feel the need to opine, the phone number here in the studio is 307-374-8989. Well, before the break, we played that interview with Rebecca Bextel. I think it was fantastic. If you missed it, or if you want to listen to it again, I'm going to play that interview on tomorrow's edition of the podcast, so you can listen to the audio there. Or you can, if you miss any of the Cowboy State Politics Live episodes, you can go to the website, and there's a tab up at the top that says Live Replay, and you can listen to all of the previous episodes of Cowboy State Politics Live. And you know, I've been a little lax on putting those up there, but I've renewed my efforts, and directly after we finish every live program, we'll make sure that we get that uploaded so you can listen to it and get caught up. Also, feel free to opine, send me an email if you've got any comments about the show. The address here at the show is david@cowboystatepolitics.com. So go ahead and drop me a note if you feel so inclined. We're probably going to go a little bit long today because there's one story that I have to cover. And I meant to do it at the top of the show, but you know how things go here. I pull out my soapbox and you never know what's going to happen. So if you haven't heard, Colorado has completely disregarded the Second Amendment. Yesterday, Jared Polis, the communist in chief down in Colorado, signed a bill that banned most semi-automatic weapons. And, you know, most modern firearms are semi-automatic. You know, a lot of rifles, a lot of shotguns, certainly pistols. So really, if you live in Colorado, I expect the gun trade in Wyoming to go up significantly here pretty quick. But yesterday, Jared Polis signed that crappy law. And let's go ahead and play cut one. Here he is signing it.
It's officially the law of Colorado. Congratulations.
Governor Jared Polis signed a controversial gun bill into law Thursday, banning the sale and purchase of certain semi-automatic firearms.
This legislation builds on our commitment to improve public safety, reduce gun violence, uphold our freedom.
The bill had support from Vet Voice Foundation, a progressive veterans group.
There's a lot of information that's been put out there that would make it seem like it's very extreme, and this is not an extreme bill whatsoever.
No.
But the Rocky
not
Mountain gun
extreme at all.
owners call it an assault on the Second Amendment.
All they want to do is they want to chip away once again at the Second Amendment.
Now, absolutely, that is their plan. It is not about public safety. It is about your freedom. And the part that they don't like, that gun grabbers always are after, is your ability to defend yourself from tyranny. That is the point of the Second Amendment. It's not about hunting. It's not about having fun. It's not about anything of the sort. Pure and simple, the Second Amendment is about protecting you, your family, and your city, your county, and ultimately your country from a tyrannical government. You have to understand that when the Second Amendment was crafted, they just came off, they were right off the heels of the Revolutionary War. Literally what they did is defend the country from a tyrannical King George. That's why the Second Amendment is there. Now, I have no doubt that there's going to be a slew of lawsuits filed over this because it is absolutely unconstitutional. There is no question about it. Now they have a gun registry. And maybe you could call it a de facto gun registry. And they've banned semi-automatic firearms. So from Denver7.com, Polis signs watered down ought to be in quotation marks in this article, but anyway, semi-automatic gun restriction bill into law. And I quote, in its original form, Senate Bill 25003 would have outright banned the manufacture, distribution, transfer, sale, or purchase of specified semi-automatic firearms, which includes semi-automatic rifles and shotguns, as well as gas-powered semi-automatic handguns with a detachable ammunition magazine. However, in February, Colorado Senate Democrats amended the bill so that those guns could still be sold if the buyer first takes a training course. So you have to jump through the government's hoops in order to exercise your constitutional rights. Absolutely outrageous.
It also, if I'm not mistaken, you have to go and apply for a permit to purchase a weapon, and that puts you on a registry.
Absolutely. That's what I said. They have a gun registry, which has been the Supreme Court has ruled almost all of this unconstitutional at one point or another. But the Democrats in Colorado, they have succeeded in flipping Colorado from a state that was largely conservative. When I went to school at Regis University back in the early 2000s, Colorado was a really conservative place. In many respects, it mirrored Wyoming. And, honestly, the only difference is there were more people there and they had bigger towns. But pretty much everything else was still the same. And that was until Pat Stryker decided to start flipping Colorado to the Democrats.
It still is very conservative. You get out on the Eastern Plains or you get over on the Western Slope, very conservative people, very much like Wyoming. I can only imagine their frustration at just being manhandled and manipulated by the Front Range.
Oh, I expect pitchforks and torches on Denver 7 News before too long. But this is an affront to the Constitution. It's an affront to your right to protect yourself. Let's continue with the article here for just a second. The bill was first introduced in January. Mr. Producer, we need to have a cough button. I don't know how we're going to rig that one up, but we need to fix that. Anyway, the bill was first introduced in January and has seen countless hours of testimony and debate. On Thursday, Governor Polis signed the Senate bill into law. Quote, I'm focused on improving public safety. Okay, so the government can't improve public safety. And the reason why is criminals don't follow the law. That's what, by definition, that's what makes them criminals. And that's the fallacy that every gun control bill misses. And that's what tells you that it isn't about safety, that it's not really about, reducing crime, that it is absolutely against preventing you from defending yourself against a tyrannical government. And the number one tyrant in the country, I thought maybe it would be Kathy Hochul, because now she's going to do a gun registry too through credit card companies. But nope. Yesterday, communist comrade Jared Polis takes the cake. And, and Agent 29, I think maybe perhaps we should build our own southern border. I mean, it's keep all those, well, they're not, I don't know if they're green license plates anymore, but I mean, with stuff like this, we need to make sure none of those politicians seep into Cheyenne.
Far be it from me to suggest any wrongdoing on anyone's part, but that border is going to be crossed often with the black market.
Absolutely.
That's one of the things that this does, is it just throws a bone to illegitimate gun sales. And the people that are actually, there's a place in Colorado Springs called Dragon Man, and they've been fighting this. They do a podcast all the time. It's very good. And this is undercutting outfits like that and turning it over to gangs.
Absolutely. That's exactly what's going to happen. Anytime you ban anything, and it doesn't matter if it's firearms or weed or, any sort of alcohol. Alcohol is a great example with prohibition. The only thing that did was, made the mob a heck of a lot of money, because, people are still people. And, it doesn't matter what the folks in the state house pass. They're still going to do what they want to do. And you have a God-given right to protect yourself. And I mean, the Supreme Court's ruled on this numerous times. And I think what we probably ought to do, Agent 29, is book Mark Jones with Gun Owners of America as soon as we can. And we'll get him on the show. And I'm sure he'll have tons to say about it. But Gun Owners of America is probably, my guess would be, going to file a litany of lawsuits over this thing.
There's also an organization, Rocky Mountain Gun Owners.
Yeah, it was mentioned in that.
Yeah, and I don't know who all is behind that, but I'm quite confident from what I'm hearing out of Colorado that they'll be involved.
Well, I certainly hope so. Well, anyway, so sorry to leave you this morning with a piece of bad news, but here's the good news out of it. We all live in Wyoming, and, for the time being, conservatives are still in control of at least part of our legislature, and you won't see a bill like this run through or pass out of the Wyoming legislature. In fact, we're kind of going in the opposite direction. I mentioned during the interview with Rebecca that, we did get some really, really good legislation out of this past session. The gun-free zones bill, or the ban on gun-free zones. I mean, I think that was incredible. Though, interestingly enough, I've seen a lot of people on social media that, before they wouldn't have said anything about asking the government for permission to carry their firearm. But now a bunch of parents are fired up that they have to ask the government if they can carry a gun, which, I mean, what they're referring to is getting a permit. So, before we leave, and maybe Agent 29, you can fill me in on the ins and outs of that bill. I think that would be helpful. So why don't you tell us exactly what's in that bill, how it works, what the whole skinny on that thing is? Maybe we can clear up some of this confusion online.
There was quite a bit of discussion about whether or not we were going to incorporate constitutional carry, or it had to be permitted. Sorry, there's a lot of switches and stuff. There we are. This is one of those deals where you have to move incrementally. If we'd have pushed for an absolute destruction of gun-free zones, which is what we all want, that's what's right, that's what's constitutional. The U.S. Constitution, the Wyoming Constitution are extremely clear on that. And from that matter, we shouldn't need anything beyond that. The Constitution ought to be plenty adequate. But it wasn't. So part of the compromise was, if you're going to carry in a school, you have to have a concealed carry permit. It's not constitutional carry. I think we came out a little bit better. It's hard to remember exactly what the final one was, because amendments come and go. But to be able to carry in the Capitol building now is a constitutional carry, I believe. It was a big victory. It wasn't complete, but it's a huge step in the right direction. especially when you look at what a number of other states are doing, as you mentioned, New York and Colorado.
Yeah, I mean, I think that conservatives have to be more amenable to incrementalism. That you're not going to get everything that you want like right out of the gate. And in my mind, if we can score a win that gets us closer to the goal, then I'm not saying that we should be okay with it, but we should take that as a win. Like you mentioned, if we pushed for an out and out, just completely get rid of gun-free zones, that bill never would have passed. And frankly, the governor probably would have vetoed it. And for me, it comes down to the difference between a political reality versus your own political ideology. You and I, and you just mentioned it, say that the Second Amendment is clear enough. I mean, it says shall not be infringed. It means what it says, and it doesn't say what it doesn't say. There's no exceptions in the Second Amendment. It doesn't say except if the school board doesn't like it, or except if the governor doesn't like it. That's not in there. But we can't get that through. So we have to be amenable to incrementalism, take what we can get, and then we work on it. We keep working on it.
Incrementalism gives you a kind of a conditioning. We've been so conditioned that there's no guns in schools that it's shocking to think that somebody might be carrying, even though concealed carriers are the absolute safest segment of society.
Absolutely.
More so than police officers, more so than whatever. It's hands down. But once this goes on for a while and people are conditioned to the idea that there have been guns in schools, it's not been a big deal. There's not been any issues. In fact, there might even be a few good things come of it, out of stopping a worse thing. Then we move to the next step. But there's a lot of conditioning, and to move things, I talked about spending in the state. And if you see a runaway train and you jump into it and just start slamming the brakes, you're going to derail that train. So we kind of have to slow things down before we change direction.
And let me give you another example here. Kind of sometimes it's easier to look at things when you compare it to something that's kind of unrelated. So in the same vein of being, at least amenable, that you'll think about incrementalism, let's talk about abortion for a minute. While all of us, me personally, would love to have an out and out ban on abortion. You can't kill babies, which in my mind, that's pretty common sense, right? We don't want to kill babies. But that bill is never going to pass. I shouldn't say never, but right now it's not going to pass. So, we politically, you kind of have to have those exceptions in there. In fact, even though I find them reprehensible, but what we do is we get the ban in place and then we work on it.
Yeah, it's interesting that you brought that up, because we did an interview with Tom Kelly that I believe is coming up next week.
That'll be on Monday.
The calendar. Okay.
Yeah.
There's really a good segment in that on this abortion thing, because he voted against one of the
House Bill 64.
Yeah. And he gives a compelling argument. Ours were slightly more compelling.
Well, yeah.
Course, but hey, you judge for yourself on Monday.
And just to kind of round out that part of the conversation, I don't like any of those exceptions, though. There are, a pretty large contingent of the population that says, well, yeah, we have to have exceptions. But think about it this way. If the big one is life of the mother. All right. First of all, that's pretty rare. Our medical technology has advanced to such a place where a lot of that stuff can be prevented. But even though if it does come down to a question of life of the mother or life of the baby, it's not an abortion. That's called triage. Doctors make those decisions all the time when they come upon a car wreck and there's multiple victims. What the doctor does, what the paramedics do, is they say, okay, we can save this guy first. We can save this person. Let's go. And it's just triage. So that's not an abortion anyway. An ectopic pregnancy, that baby is never going to develop. I mean, it's that's a sad, a sad situation. But an ectopic pregnancy, that's never going to be born. And so that's not an abortion either. And in the case of, this one I find absolutely reprehensible, but it is one of the exceptions in the Life as a Human Right Act, in the case of rape or incest. Well, there is no other crime where we punish the victim because a crime has been committed. And that's how I see that one. So what I'm saying is sometimes to get your political goals achieved, you have to do it incrementally. I'm not saying that it's right. I'm not saying that that's what we ultimately want. But what I am saying is the political reality of getting certain pieces of legislation passed is very different than our own political ideology. And to get to what we want in our political ideology, then we have to work on it incrementally. And, with the gun thing, well, in Colorado, it needs to have about 200 lawsuits filed against it and make it to the Supreme Court tomorrow. But it's, there's redcoats and communists running everywhere. And, a lot of times, Agent 29, people tell me that, hey, man, you just see redcoats around every corner. And my reply is, yeah, because there are. And sometimes I feel like Joe McCarthy, but hey, he was right. Well, we've burned up another busy broadcast week on the program. Make sure that you don't miss an episode of Cowboy State Politics Live or the podcast. You can listen to the podcast anywhere. Apple, iTunes, Amazon, iHeartRadio, Podbean, anywhere. Make sure that you subscribe and follow the program. That way you can be notified. But now, I guess, it's time for me to go. Have a good weekend, my friends. I'm David Iverson, and this is Cowboy State Politics.